And also this story, this one does divide the room somewhat. A one-off wealth tax would be the best way to patch up UK public finances battered by the coronavirus crisis. This is according to the Wealth Tax Commission. They said the government should look at a tax on millionaire couples rather than increasing income tax or VAT. Taxing those households an extra 1% above £1 million threshold would raise £260 billion over 5 years. Let's speak to Gary Stevenson. Himself a millionaire, former trader, wants the wealthy to pay for COVID. Now, an inequality, is that right, an inequality economist?
Yes, that's right, Ian.
Afternoon, Gary. The only reason I paused at that, I thought you were championing inequality for a second. I thought that would be a curious job to have, wouldn't it? But you're an economist looking at issues of inequality. And I said at the beginning of this, Gary, or just before the news, this one divides me somewhat, and I'm sure lots of people feel the same, because I can see how persuasive and seductive the argument is. If somebody's worth a few quid, it's a one-off tax, then why not? It's not going to be forever. You could argue it's in their interest as well, long term. But there's another part of it that thinks, well, if you always go cap in hand to rich people, you could play that game every day of the week that there's any kind of crisis.
Yeah, that's the concern. It's addressed in the report. A lot of the some economists at the London School of Economics and a group of lawyers and tax accountants have looked at this. There is they've addressed that in the report. I think the thing we need to consider here is there's a massive increase, as everybody knows, in government debt due to the COVID crisis. It's coming up to £500 billion just from this year. Something has to be done about that. It will have to be addressed. At the moment, the very richest in our society often pay the lowest rates of tax. It's famous some billionaires pay less than their cleaners.
As a rate,
yes, as a rate, yeah. Someone's going to have to deal with this. And if it's not the very richest, who often pay very little, then it might have to be hardworking people like you and I, Ian.
I mean, in terms of tax thresholds, you will know a bit about this, Gary. You did well in the city and you've earned a few quid, and that's fabulous. What happens in terms of taxation once what is the top rate of tax you can pay at that level?
Well, I think the top rate of income tax at the moment is 45%.
So that doesn't change between having, 150,000 or 50,000 to having 2 billion.
No, well, when I was working, there was temporarily a 50% rate tax.
That's
but I think at the moment, the top rate is back down to 45%.
So it's still 45%. There's nothing above that.
Yeah, but what's important to realize is that tax gets charged on worked income. But the very richest people, they make a lot of their income, often most of their income, in the case of the richest, in ways that is not through working. For example, trusts, inheritances, capital gains. And these methods of income are taxed often a lot less. And some of these guys will be paying less than 20% tax. And they may even be making billions in income.
Yeah.
So there comes a question where you have to ask, why are people who are earning 50, 60 grand a year paying 45% when the Duke of Westminster is making £9 billion and not paying anything?
Yeah. And in terms of your own situation, I mean, you've done well. I don't think you're making 9 billion quid, Gary, but nonetheless, you would be prepared to pay more.
I'll tell you what, at the moment in this country, we've got a chancellor whose father-in-law is a multi-billionaire and his wife is estimated to be worth about £500 million. If Rishi Sunak pays, I'll pay.
But then Rishi Sunak might say, well, OK, that's all very well, but he shouldn't be judged on his spouse and her family.
All right, if Rishi Sunak's wife pays.
Self-made man. Yeah, if Mrs. Sunak pays the big bundle, then you will as well. How would you, would you just have a one-off payment? Do you think that would work? Or do you think there should be a kind of an increase in the basic rates of income tax? Because the smart money always says, Gary, as you know, that if you up it to 50%, and I believe there is evidence for this when Gordon Brown had his sort of 5 minutes at the 50% rate of it, this is just income tax, that the intake was actually, the overall tax intake was slightly less because people just found ways to avoid it.
You know what, I really want to try and be clear about drawing the line here. There's a difference here between what these guys are doing in this report is they're talking about taxing wealth. So it's maybe families that they might have accumulated wealth over possibly centuries, 50 million, 100 million pounds.
True.
It's about taxing families that are accumulating huge amounts of wealth and their wealth is just getting bigger and bigger. Yeah. They often don't pay income tax because they don't get their income through working like you do or like I did when I was working. So we're not talking about taxing lawyers and doctors here. We're talking about taxing extremely wealthy families who are accumulating wealth over generations. And often don't get their income through work. So
Yeah.
it's not really about what level of income tax. It's about, do we get the super rich to pay at all?
Yeah.
Because often right now they're not paying all.
Yeah. So it's a kind of misnomer, really, the idea that we talk about income tax and we kind of obsess on that, but actually the real big bunts comes from elsewhere. It comes from those funds, those pots, those investments. It's those kind of areas.
Yeah. It's a choice in a way, because there's a massive debt here. It's increased huge. Somebody has to pay it. Yeah. And in a sense, the government has to choose. Do we go to the super rich, like, for example, the Chancellor's wife, or do we go to people who are working?
Yeah.
And at the moment, I've worked and I've paid a lot of tax, but a lot of these guys who are a lot richer than me, many, many, many times richer than me, and I presume you as well, are not paying anything. And it's not fair, and it's damaging to the economy. Because if you squeeze the middle class, then there's no spending, Yeah. Rishi Sunak's wife is not going to keep the whole economy alive. We need to tax the rich as well.
Do you think the government response to that might, but apart from ideologically, they would say it's not the right thing to do, and we can argue that forever, but do you think the government might say, well, we'd need to set up such a complicated system in order to find where all of those funds and investments lurk that it would become impossible?
Yeah, I mean, when you consider, as we've said, that the Chancellor's father-in-law is a multi-billionaire, the government might say something like that. But the work that the economists and the various people on this panel have done today is basically saying, look, we've done the work. We've shown you how you can do it. We've shown you how it can work. And there are other economists in America who have done similar work, like Gabriel Zucman. The economists are putting the work in to show how you can do it. We need the government to come on board and say, look, we are committed to making sure the richest pay as well. And the economists will work with them. I'll work with them for free. Look, if they want to call me up, I'll work with them. I'll tell them how to do it. Yeah. But we need to know they're on side. And in theory, they're on board with making sure the super rich, like Rishi Sunak's family, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, actually pay their way. And it's not just put on the hardworking people of this country.
Good work, Gary. Thank you. Gary Stevenson, former trader, himself a millionaire, would happily pay more money if other people were doing it. But is it down to the rich to fill that void?